I want to begin this video by wishing everybody a very happy and peaceful and enjoyable winter solstice, whatever variation of that you celebrate. I felt like talking about music. Specifically a moment for me in 1985, Christmas 1985. I was thinking about calling this video Music That Saved Me in the 80s. Because growing up, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. My brother and I moved here with my parents to central Oklahoma in 1982. So, 1985, Christmas time. It was either Christmas Eve or one of the preceding evenings. And that's why I'm doing this video now. Something happened that night that would set a trend throughout my life. I heard Pink Floyd, a song called Run Like Hell, for the first time in my life, and that changed everything for me. Thing is, I realized this night I'm talking about, I was laying alone late at night, Christmas tree lights on as you see here. It was just me late at night. I developed a bit of a tradition by then of listening to what I was starting to think of as my own Christmas music. It was Beethoven's Fifth Piano Concerto, not Symphony, Piano Concerto, The Emperor, and Chopin's Piano Concerto Number 1. There are some other classical pieces too, but it's mainly those two. I had to hear them during Christmas time, and I realized during Christmas of 1985, while I was listening to this, what it meant, those two pieces of music meant to me. And there was this yearning for something beyond what I was hearing on the radio all the time. I knew there was good music out there beyond what you're being told is popular and what your friends all like, and you all know what was going on musically in the 80s. So, let's do a bit of a prequel for just a minute. 1984, I was in 6th grade. Keep in mind, we're in central Oklahoma. One of my schoolmates, good friend of mine, I still to this day do not know how he came across this music or these musicians, but he introduced me to Cocteau Twins, Susie and the Banshees, and the Smiths, many other European groups of that time. I heard it all for the first time and blew me away. Some of it I knew it would take an acquired taste, but I was still interested. By the way, Susie and the Banshees remains one of my favorite groups of all time. I became a little obsessed with this whole post-punk movement. How in the late 70s there were all these punk bands, and it was all about... Well, Frank Zappa put it best. He said, punk is all about, I hate you, I don't care, I'm mad at my parents, you don't understand me. It's all about a reaction. And I get it. It was a necessary one at that time. But some of those bands, including Susie and the Banshees, quickly turned into something else. A creativity emerged out of that. Every song they did was totally different than the last one. And I was hungry for that. So, I heard about that. I heard them, and I made recordings of them, and yet I also kind of forgot about them just because of everything going on. I wasn't doing well in school. Well, suffice to say, some other stuff. Kind of... The interest remained, but I'll get to it soon, was the idea. Christmas 1985 rolls around. I'm listening to my Chopin piece, my Beethoven piece. I hear Run Like Hell by Pink Floyd. Headphones on, plugged into that giant 80s stereo. And it was the most heroic thing I'd ever heard. It's like, this is it. I need more of this. Pink Floyd changed my life. And I mean, really, the timing of this was the beginning of yet another trend. Here I am discovering Pink Floyd just after they'd split up. And, as I had soon to find out, just before they would reunite and put out a new album. So I was obsessed with them. They took me to these other worlds. It was so much fun. They plugged me into things I was feeling and yearning for and gave that to me in full. Alongside Susie, Pink Floyd stays with me. Most particularly their 70s stuff with Roger Waters. Because when they came back in 1987, yeah, I really enjoyed that album. But after that, something was missing. Well, it was Roger Waters, their bass player and singer, for the one of the two main singers, for those who don't know. But the sincerity in the way the melodies were written and constructed, and the lyrics, just as much as creative music, I was craving sincerity and integrity in music, and they gave me that. So, you know, you hear the radio, everybody's feeding you whatever song was newly popular at that time. You already go, oh, God, you know, I'm going to hear this at least once an hour for the next year. So, 1984, that was, you know, we were buying records. It was a big year for popular music. Madonna's Like a Virgin was brand new. You had Prince, Purple Rain, Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA, Wham, Van Halen, of course, 1984. These were the biggest ones. And yeah, I liked some of that stuff, but I wanted something I wasn't supposed to like. Not for that reason. I just wanted something more. And I was getting it. So, what happened in 85 bled over into 86. That was the year I was leaving grade school, moving on into high school. And how did this happen? I rediscovered. I heard mention of both Cocteau Twins and Susie and the Banshees. And I ran into that friend again, although I didn't see him as much. We went to the same high school for 1 year for our freshman year, but I rarely saw him. And seeing him is what reminded me of Susie and the Banshees and the Smiths. I was a very shy kid when I was 12, 13, 14. I had just got my first guitar at age 14, and I was teaching myself. Spent almost all my free time alone at home, and I'm not doing a woe is me kind of thing. It's at least half of that is the way I wanted it. Because I wanted to dive into this music, and I wanted more of it. So I still feel the same way about the Smiths. Half the reason I'm doing this video, by the way, is because I'm hoping to introduce some younger people to some of these groups. And singers and songwriters who I wanted then to be more well-known than they were. But at the same time, I was really enjoying their relative unknown status. I didn't know how much so, since it was all new to me at that time. But they were giving me something different. Okay, what I mentioned about the Smiths. The guitar player for that group, Johnny Marr, remains one of my favorites for his compositional skills, perhaps more than even than his playing skills. He's the most unique guitar songwriter. When I first heard their music, I'd hear Morrissey singing, and my brain is weighing it against the guitar melody. Something isn't right. It sounded like they were being forced to fit together. And I'd come to find out much later, Johnny Marr would write all the music, Morrissey would get it and write lyrics and sing it on top of that. And I found myself, to this day, with many of their songs, and I take turns doing this with different songs, wanting to hear the instrumental version. Nothing against Morrissey. I enjoy that part of the Smiths too, but I feel that way. I want to hear just the melody because it's so cool. I hope that makes sense to people. So I want to name some of the people I discovered from that moment in 85 on through 86. And I've got a couple of notes here. I didn't want to forget anybody. Along the way of discovering some of these, I'd go out shopping, and you're a little bit limited at that time for your record shopping or tapes, which were coming out at that time, transitioning from record to tape. And I had both, of course. So at this time, it was mainly Pink Floyd, Above and Beyond. Just beneath them, I had Susie and the Banshees. That's Siouxsie, as in like the Sioux Indians. Susie Sue was her name. She goes by. Susie and the Banshees, the Smiths, Cocteau Twins, named after Jean Cocteau. This is the most beautiful music you will ever hear in your life. Again, just creative. It's like heaven as a sound. I encourage everybody to look up Cocteau Twins, almost anything you hear. Their most famous songs are called Carolyn's Fingers, and the lead singer, Elizabeth Fraser, worked with another group, which wasn't really a group so much as it was a project of people who shared the same record label that worked all together, doing duets and just various creative collaborations for 3 albums. They are called This Mortal Coil, I didn't really get a chance to discover those albums by This Mortal Coil till around 1990, 91 maybe. And the lead singer, Elizabeth Fraser from Cocteau Twins, sang for them on a couple of songs. One of these songs has near mythical status today. It's called Song to the Siren. And you're going to hear many variations of it. Some of them are nice, but this song is on its own tallest special pedestal to me. Song to the Siren by Elizabeth Fraser with This Mortal Coil, who is also originally with the group Cocteau Twins. That's a lot, I know. That's the one you need to hear. Remains special to me to this day. Cocteau Twins, even more than the Smiths now. I really fell into this whole shoegazing thing that became big from the late 80s on into the mid 90s and very quickly died away. It's a weird thing, all this creative music in the early 90s. There were all these new bands coming out, and they would just quickly come and go. There's this giant creative burst in music, and then it just so quickly just went away, and it gave way to hip-hop taking over everything. And that's fine. People like what they like. It's just not for me. Especially after it took over everything, I started looking harder for these. Anyways, let's go back to the 80s. I don't want to leave anybody out because it was so important to me finding this stuff. I wanted, you turn off your radio, you're still going to hear this stuff at the mall, wherever you go, your friends' houses, in their car. A woman, an Israeli singer named Ofra Haza. You've probably heard her and you don't even know her. For those of you who do not know her, she sang the theme music from, oh my God, what was the Disney animated movie from the late 90s about Joseph in Egypt? anyways, Ofra Haza sang the main music from that. And if you look for it on the internet, you can find she sang that same song in something like 22 different languages. Incredible voice. I've heard a song of hers called simply Love Song. And it's sung in Hebrew. It's only about 2 minutes long. It's a cappella. And it just replayed in my heart for years and years. And I found the album, and it turned out she did a lot of typical sounding pop music that would come to really get to me. It's still, again, to this day, when I hear somebody's own creative signature sound and their own culture, but then maybe a little bit later on they give way to a hip-hop-ish sound or whatever's currently popular. So I hear Love Song, I heard the album. There were 2 other songs I liked on it, and the rest of it sounded like typical pop you can hear anywhere, which would be very, very easily dated to the mid-'80s very quickly afterward. Thankfully now, with the internet, I can look at her unbelievable discography. I mean, she's so prolific. She wound up dying tragically. I think she got AIDS from her husband who was cheating on her. But please look up Ofra Haza and please find anything from the 80s or 90s onward. I would recommend Love Song or Imnin Alu or Kol Haneshima. All I knew in the 80s, because back then, remember, we didn't have internet. Foreign music, you had whoever chose what foreign music you were going to have on tape or record there. Thankfully, I found one Ofra Haza album. There are, to this day, only 3 performers I like in the whole New Age genre. They happen to be the biggest ones. Kitaro, Tangerine Dream, and Vangelis. At this time, this stuff was so ridiculously expensive just because it was foreign. And at the time, I didn't care. I was willing to pay for it because I was craving this stuff. So the instrumental, just beautiful, creative music from all 3 of those. Vangelis sometimes works with vocalists. Who else? There's a couple I have in mind. I'm waiting to get there, but The Cult. Now, I don't like everything they've done, but their album, Love, so simple, so straightforward. It's just called Love. The cover art is just black and white. It's just the name, The Cult, Love, in white on a black backdrop. This album meant so much to me. It remains one of my favorite albums, particularly 4 of its songs. Now I realize this video is seeming like a commercial. It's running long a little bit, so it might seem like an infomercial, but oh well. The idea is to take it easy, kick back, talk about music that had this starting point, Christmas '85. Very, very special to me. I'm sure everybody has a moment like that. Tell me about it, in fact. Tell me your moment. If you have one, you can narrow it down to. And in fact, give me some titles of bands, songwriters, vocalists, artists, things maybe you feel deserve more attention. So The Cult, the album was Love. The songs, in fact, let me mention the songs on the album. The title song, Love. Another one called Brother Wolf, Sister Moon, which I used in my a video I made right after my very abrupt spiritual awakening. It was I think I described it as a Wicca-flavored poem for Hecate. And I used that song in there. Please excuse the truck driving outside. There's a third song, Black Angel. I can't mention specific titles from Cocteau Twins. It's just find almost anything and kick back, and you'll see why. I'll tell you this much: the lead singer, she rarely sang actual words. It's all about the structure of the sound. Sometimes she had words in mind, random phrases mixed with just made up sounds, not from any dialect or language. And that was part of the beauty of it, is your brain and your heart can fill it with whatever you have that's magnetized you towards that music to begin with. You just let it plug itself in there. And Tangerine Dream, that too was 1985, the soundtrack to the movie Legend. Now, we can argue that it was a bad, overly simplistic movie. I love it. For those of you who have not seen, in fact, I used some scenes from that in my Essence of Tarot's Priestess video. Fantasy movie. Tangerine Dream did the soundtrack. I should point that out, that now there is available a version of it with an unused Jerry Goldsmith score. I love Jerry Goldsmith, but I don't think his music worked for it, and I know much of the reason for that is I love the Tangerine Dream soundtrack so much. It is one of my favorite albums of all time. It is certainly my favorite soundtrack of all time. My second favorite being the highly underrated, okay, this too is a bad, in fact, it's a horrible movie, Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, from 1993. So sad, because it's from a great book, great author. Tom Robbins wrote the book, same title, Even Cowgirls Get the Blues. The soundtrack is from K.D. Lang, amazing Canadian singer. But this Legend soundtrack from Tangerine Dream, I used to go park my car after high school down at a private spot in a forested area by a local lake. I still live near that lake now. And listen to it. Just close my eyes and wish for a life beyond, well, all of this. Modern education, things we have to do with employment and just being an adult in the usual ways. Oh my God, that could be a whole other story. How do I live life as an artist is where my thoughts would go listening to that music. How do I live my life as an artist, being nothing but sincere, with integrity, absolutely intact? See, I'm kind of drifting into it right now, and I don't even hear Tangerine Dream. Who am I for? The Damned. That's right, I said The Damned. Now, they go along with Susie and the Banshees. They started in the late 70s as a punk band, a reaction to, well, a reactionary band. It's suffice to say that. And they quickly, it's really kind of cool and weird that in tandem with Susie and the Banshees, they found their own creativity. And that's where I started to love them. When the anger stuff was fading away, but they still had attitude and drive, and it was invigorated and invigorating, but now with creativity. And maybe more importantly, a purpose-driven spirit to go, well, that's what creativity is, to go new places, to take you in new places. The song that turned me into them, you would not guess if you'd heard this stuff, and that they began as a punk band. It's like the ultimate gothic love song. all that stuff that goes by the subgenre heading of Gothic from the 90s onward, I'm sorry, it's all either garbage or just copycat stuff that doesn't quite work. There's some highlights here and there, but you had to be in the 80s for this goth thing. Again, highly underrated, at least here in America. The Damned, the song that turned me on to them, Sanctum Sanctorum. Look it up. You hear rain in the background. Some people don't get into the guy's voice, but this is my thing, and it still is. This is just one of those bands that never went away. I would look up to hear the different types of things they do. Look up that song, Sanctum Sanctorum by The Damned, and look up also Alone Again or Grimly Fiendish. There's an Addams Family kind of thing these guys have going on, where they take these dark gothic subjects, but they express it whimsically. You can almost feel the spirit of Edward Gorey painting album covers. If they'd lived at the same time, perhaps he would have. So The Damned, another very important band to me. And I'm mentioning all these because, my God, in a world of you-know-what pop acts were here, and it was nothing but them in the 80s. So when these names come up, you find others who like some of the stuff. You can introduce some of these bands to each other. I met some people like that I could do that with. You end up being friends with other people and getting accused of, oh, you just like this stuff because it's not on the radio. You like it because... No, this is very easy to address. That's not why I like it. I'm all the more hungry for it because it's not on the radio. I think those are all the ones I need to mention from that time. So I may as well... I've got no problem with admitting that as time goes on, I leave high school, go throughout the 90s, it just remained a very depressing time for me. Above and beyond anything for me was the search for my wife, who I have always felt married to. And it became sickening that I was not physically with her yet, and I didn't know where I was going to find her. But I had to hang on to hope that she was doing the same for me. And of course that would happen much, much later. But my point for the purposes of this video is the 90s. It had its moments. I worked in a restaurant for most of this time. I had some fun hanging out with friends, just doing the 90s thing. A lot of people remember the 90s as being like a repeat of the 70s, and there was 70s nostalgia in the 90s. I got a chance to get together with some friends and record a lot of music, some opportunities I've not had in a while. I'm talking about with good recording equipment, several instruments, specifically two of my friends. We recorded a lot of music together. We had the same musical tastes, and one of those guys, you hear a little bit of music he wrote. He's very into electronica. You hear one of his pieces of music that's just him. I use that in my riffs and dubs series, where I just make fun of cheesy movies. I use that as the main theme. The other guy, he wrote, and I guess you could say directed, a musical project. There's an called Hiccup Road, and the album is called The Time of Disappearing. I've used one of his songs in one of my Tarot Essence videos, and I'm going to use one or two of them in an upcoming Essence of Tarot video. I won't say which one yet. something that's it's another trump card, which has been very, very, we'll say significant to me lately. Anyways, I got to record with those two guys, and we introduced each other to a lot of music, so some more important people came around. I mentioned Cocteau Twins and This Mortal Coil. So, right along with that, 1990. Dead Can Dance came into my life. And like Pink Floyd, hearing Run Like Hell, this was like the final culmination of what I was looking for. I listen to them as much, if not more now, than I did then. These people, this is just like my part of my spirit in this music. It's what I wanted to do. They do musically what I've always sought to do in storytelling, and what I want to do in music too. A man and a woman. It began as, I think they were a couple. They get together and record an album every once in a while. At least that's how it was at the time. He lived in an abandoned church in Ireland. She grew up in a Turkish community in Australia. Both of them with a love for classical music, and I mean classical from every culture. So what I've told you already, Celtic, Turkish, Australian, they both love Greek, Mediterranean, have Middle Eastern flavors. She plays a yangqin, which is a hammered dulcimer. It's now one of my favorite instruments. It might be my favorite instrument, but it's one of them. She has the most beautiful, ethereal voice. Ethereal in a different, deeper way than Elizabeth Fraser from the Cocteau Twins. And I want to recommend these people to everybody watching this. This also became kind of part of my personal Christmas soundtrack, listening to Dead Can Dance. They make you feel somehow peaceful and excited at the same time. I've used their music plenty of times in my videos, and I can't recommend them enough. So from the early 90s, Dead Can Dance stayed with me. There's a group called My Bloody Valentine. They were the ultimate shoegazing music, but it was really heavy and fuzzy. So I mentioned the early 90s. I think of 1993 as being the capping year where this all stopped and everything gave way to hip-hop and hardcore rap in the mid-90s. I felt like everything new I was hearing after 93, almost everything, people were trying to recapture the music I've been telling you about so far, in the time I've been telling you about so far. So I carried with me all these bands through there, and it was like the same thing. Take me away from radio garbage. Again, you're going to hear some good stuff. I shouldn't just blanket statement now and then. But I get it. There's a reason people like music that's on the radio. There's more for more people to relate to, but... Oh, I should mention, speaking of that, I should mention very popular people who became important to me, but maybe from another time. Stevie Wonder and Herbie Hancock, both. Now, there's a specific phase of theirs from the very late 60s, I mean, really 68, probably more, 69, throughout the mid to 69 till about 76, 77. These two guys, Stevie Wonder and Herbie Hancock equally, fused jazz and funk in a way like I had never heard and have never heard. I know you are all familiar with Stevie Wonder. Please, specifically, look into the things he did in the early 70s. Listen to a song called You Ain't Got Nothing. And it's going to... what's going on politically right now? He's singing about it, even though that song came out in the 70s. And I'm sure we could say the same thing again 20 years from now. There's a beautiful, really simple song called Happier Than the Morning Sun. Very funky, and yet it's soft and beautiful. It's a love song. Herbie Hancock might be the most underrated musician of all time. I know he's popular. People are aware of him as a jazz musician, but the most popular thing he's ever done is the most uncharacteristic thing he's ever done. Go back to 1980, not even 84, 83, I think. He had a song called Rocket, and it was very synthesizer-oriented, very of its time. I don't think ages very well. It's his 70s stuff. This man is a genius. I do not use that word lightly. Herbie Hancock is a musical genius. So is Frank Zappa. I need to add that. I don't care about a lot of his extremely silly lyrics or the songs about his groupies. I'm only in the mood for him sometimes, while at the same time I love Frank Zappa and can call him a genius, whereas Herbie Hancock, anytime. In the 60s, it was pure jazz. In the 70s, it's this juicy funk jazz fusion. And you hear it and you just think that is pure artistry. This is someone who loves music. What is it? A song called Man-Child. Look that one up as an example of what I'm talking about. Or from what may be his most famous album of this phase of his, Watermelon Man. What else struck me in the 80s? King Crimson. I'm not as familiar with their full body material as I probably should be, like Pink Floyd, but they have so much in common with Pink Floyd. They affected me so much. Specifically, the songs. Now, if you look these up, you may only be able to find the live versions, but I am talking about the studio versions of The Court of the Crimson King, title song from that album, and more than anything else, a song called I Talk to the Wind. It's the most pagan thing ever. And the most beautiful flute melody. Kind of the spirit of some Moody Blues. Yeah, I could not find that album for a long time, but I would request it on the radio a lot. This was also we go up in a year or two, about 88, 89. I heard Ben's Song by Sarah Mclaughlin. Fell in love with her music, and in 90 or 91 she came out with an album that I fell in love with every song on. And I thought, okay, as for a singer-songwriter, people look at and say the legend like Bob Dylan. Sarah Mclaughlin to me is the female Bob Dylan. The way people look at him in the 60s, I look at her in the 90s, specifically in the early 90s. Donovan, hippie guy from the 60s, very Celtic. I kept discovering more and more songs from him. I couldn't believe how prolific he was. Again, nowhere near as prolific as Frank Zappa. I really don't want to leave anybody out. Maybe I should just talk about styles. It was in the mid-90s when I was realizing how much I hated. Most rap to me felt like it just had an ugly spirit. And I get it. The whole argument was, well, we're just conveying what we see in reality. It's like, yeah, but in so doing, you're also contributing to more of it. I don't want to talk about all of it like that, but because I felt the same way about a lot of metal and this merging of metal rap, like that you see in Limp Bizkit and people that do this kind of thing. There was this weird back and forth body language to the camera and hand gestures that make no sense. And like this, I've got to stay angry all the time kind of thing. It was in the middle of realizing how much I couldn't stand that stuff and I would do anything to escape it, that I was discovering how much I loved island music and reggae and old jazz. Old jazz that would culminate in the Miles Davis era of I Better Leave It at Bitches Brew. So 1969. I'm sure there's some. He's so prolific. It's unbelievable. I hate what he was doing by the 80s. I don't know how that happened, but I'm sure everybody here's heard of Miles Davis, amazing jazz musician, horrible human being, amazing musician. So I was really discovering that stuff, and I got into the old school soul music, Aretha Franklin, and older than that, Sarah Vaughan. I'm going to hate myself for not remembering names. Who is the voice of jazz that everybody loves? You hear in music all the time. Billie Holiday. I was really into this stuff in the mid-90s, and I still love it. It was all new to me then. So I was buying it up on record and tape. Yes, tape, cassette. We're still only into cassettes, not even CDs yet. Because I wouldn't get there till CDs or DVDs until I think the year. Okay, I was getting CDs by the late 90s. DVDs not till 2001. Or, no, 2002. I know, I'm behind, intentionally. I had a flip phone until a couple months ago, and the year is 2020 as I record this. I love flip phones. I like having the cover protected. You drop it every once in a while, the outside gets cracked, not the face. The outside gets dirty. Even no matter how much you clean it, dusty, fingerprinted, not the face. That's another story. So, let me blanket statement in a good way. One thing that was going on, taking its time beyond all this other music we've talked about, music of India. Specifically, traditional music with female voice and flute. I know that's very specific. I heard a song and saw a video from a movie called Taal, Taal, called Ishq Bina, Ishq Bina, and that made me. There's a flute melody in there. It's the most beautiful melody I've ever heard in my life. And I thought this, my pull to India, made me realize how much I had always loved Indian music. I just never paid much attention to it, never thought to go out looking to buy the music. I heard this in 2003, and I finally began hunting down, looking for the type of Indian music I wanted. And this is what makes me feel fully like myself. This is what makes me feel close to my wife, though we've not met in this life yet. And of course, it would turn out my wife is Persian. she and I were both looking for each other in India, but we realized later that we were doing that because we both love India and Indian music and movies. With her, it's more of the Bollywood stuff. With me, it's more of the traditional stuff. So, Indian music, and that still is on the incline. I can't get enough of it, and thankfully, there is so much of it. I think I've mentioned the main ones. I should mention, it's funny, I got into Pink Floyd 85, 86. Obsessively went and bought every album as soon as I could. They had just broken up. 2 years prior? Of course, I didn't know at the time they were about to get back together in 1987, just as I'd bought the last album I had to buy of theirs. They get back together and come out with Momentary Lapse of Reason 1987. I was so excited. After that album, I kind of they didn't have the angst and passion of their bass player and second singer and chief lyric writer Roger Waters, so that kind of killed it for me. Anyways, my whole point of this, I knew there was music this good and that creative out there, and I didn't have it. And the ones I've taken the time to name for you, I hope you'll look into if you don't already know them, because they're the ones that did it for me. They took me to other worlds. And they remain an inspiration to me today. My taste in music is so similar to what it is in movies. I like patience, a sense of patience, a slow pacing in a lot of entertainment, something that can allow you to absorb and get involved. I like the opposite also. It's just that tends to be the main thing. I should add, it was the mid 90s when I discovered the Grateful Dead. No. Earlier, it was 93. I heard Scarlet Begonias, the studio version. I want to recommend that to everybody. And I say that because, for the most part, those of you who aren't into the Dead, it's all about the live music. That's where you generally want to go. But I'm recommending the studio version of Scarlet Begonias as a place to start. I don't even know what else to say about them. I get it. People either love them or they don't. Kind of the same thing with Pink Floyd. As far as I got into them, I discovered and said, okay, I'm enjoying this. Is fun. I'm in. And then Jerry Garcia died. Okay. That was 95. Who else? I'm looking at my list here. I got to record a lot of music. I was into that a lot of the time. Flamenco and Bossa Nova, I discovered late 90s. Thought, where have I been with this? The very idea of how Bossa Nova started. That took what I was looking for, that shoegazing, that slow pace, that easygoing spirit, sung in Brazilian Portuguese. The very idea of just slow jazz with pop song length. What's her name? I'm not sure I know how to pronounce her family name. Nara Leao. Her name is spelled Nara, last name Leao. This is a good place to start with her music. In fact, this whole subgenre of jazz in Brazil, of Bossa Nova, kind of began with her and her friends in her apartment. So, anyways, in some ways things have not changed because hip-hop and this overproduced and over-homogenized quality of modern pop still kind of holds sway today. Kind of between that and all these singing contest so-called reality shows makes me feel like I'm in a extended version of a Black Mirror episode, the feeling goes on of a lot of this. And so I'm constantly on the lookout for creative artists, and it's in some ways it's harder to find them now because of the internet, because anybody can make music and put it out there. But I want to hear from you. Tell me your story with this stuff. Who took you away? Or who's taking you away now and said, here's something different. And creative, and just as important, creative and sincere. The integrity and sincerity are hand in hand with the creativity and freshness of it. You know what? I'm reminded of some people I'd heard of and wish I'd heard and known of back in the 80s. A good example of this continuing today, there's an artist, this woman named Diamanda Galas. I know that's a Greek name. Let me spell it out for you because I really want to suggest this too. Diamanda, Diamanda, last name Galas, Galas. Again, not for everybody. Certainly not for everybody, but this woman now, I remember seeing banners for her album covers plastered on the walls of record stores in the early 90s. In fact, in the late 80s and throughout the 90s, and hearing mention of her. I never quite heard her. I saw her records, and I was vaguely curious, but I was intimidated. I was scared of her. And, of course, that was because of the imagery she puts out of herself. People, let me tell you, this woman is a true artist in every sense of the word. I get it that she's going to scare people in some ways. I won't bother explaining. If you look her name up and you see imagery, I get it. I'll leave it at that. I want to recommend her, though. She does a lot of experimentation with her voice. Sometimes she just purely screams, but she'll manipulate the scream into a pattern. There's really no explaining, but I hear her now, and I wish I had taken a chance on purchasing something of hers, because I was intrigued despite the fact that I was intimidated. Anyways, she's my example of how this kind of thing goes on today. And it all started this moment, 1985, just kind of when it all came together to me. So India, music from India, it's like it has its own slow, steep path that whole time. Well, I guess I never talked about Indian music from back then. I had, from the 80s, I bought an album just like the best of traditional India, something simple like that. It was just drums, sitar, flute, sarod, simple stuff. A compilation of music by Ravi Shankar, the amazing, great Ravi Shankar. His daughter is doing wonderful things, by the way, Anushka Shankar. And I couldn't name any of the singers I heard back then. I wish I could have. But this remains my favorite music ever. This is the kind of thing that makes me feel like I'm calling out to myself and my wife from another time, from the future and the past. I don't care how ridiculous that sounds. That's the best way I have of describing it. It's absolutely timeless stuff. India is just part of me spiritually. That too is another story. That is really all I wanted to address, people. I wanted to share a musical spirit with everybody, since it was important to me. And what is this, the third or fourth time I'm asking now? Tell me about your stuff. Who said it for you? Turn me on to some new stuff. A blessed, blessed, blessed winter solstice to everybody. Good night.